Rajan, Professor Khadria, Professor Bhagat, all of them who have been working in this field for years on end. So we are very pleased to have all of you amongst us. GCM is important as far as global migration governance is concerned, and is also significant in terms of the space it provides to countries to align their national policies, keeping in mind the 23 objectives. And as you all are aware, this year will be the first review forum as far as Global Compact on Migration is concerned. So it envisages a whole of society and whole of government approach. To that end, we have brought together all of you to this panel discussion so that we can talk and discuss amongst us the prospects, the implementation of GCM offers to India, and the best practices India can portray to the world as far as the voluntary national review is concerned. So to that end, we'll have today's discussion, but first I would like to invite my colleague from the ministry, Under Secretary Sanjeev Kumar, to give the opening remarks. Over to you.
Thank you, Surbi. Actually, because of sudden some emergency in our division, so our JS has not been able to come for the opening remarks. So he asked me to do this. So I'm very pleased to be here amongst all of you. So let me start. So warm greetings to all the eminent speakers, distinguished moderators, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to join and welcome you all to this virtual panel discussion today on International Migration Review Form 2022, GCM Implementation and Prospects for India. This discussion is timely and pertinent as the first International Migration Review Form is scheduled to be held from 17 to 20 May this year to review the progress made by countries till now in implementing the objective of GCM. India is a significant contributor to the global economy with 32 million NRI and OCIs residing abroad, making it the largest diaspora globally. India has emerged as a reliable talent hub to the world, providing CEOs, software engineers, academicians, doctors, nurses, and skilled workers. It signifies that India's demographic dividend is helping in fulfilling the demand gap of destinations country across the continents. These aspects indicate India's crucial role as a global player in migration dynamics. Adoption of Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration in 2018 has provided a comprehensive framework ensuring our collective commitment towards cooperation on international migration. Its guiding principle and 23 objectives are serving as a roadmap for countries in addressing challenges associated with migration. India is a signatory to the GCM and has played a constructive role in framing the global migration governance framework. India's strong faith in multilateralism can be witnessed through its active participation in Colombo Process, Abu Dhabi Dialogues, Global Forum on Migration and Development, to engage in discussion related to migration. Moreover, India and European Union are working toward a better management of migration and mobility through the Common Agenda on Migration and Mobility to develop an improved knowledge based on migration flows. The government of India has taken very significant policy measures to ensure the welfare of Indian immigrants. For instance, the Indian Community Welfare Fund has been assisting overseas Indian nationals in times of distress and emergency. Pravasi Bharatiya Bima Yojana serves as a mandatory insurance scheme with rupees 275 for 2 years and rupees 375 for 3 years with a coverage of 10 lakhs for the insured person. Pravasi Kaushal Vikas Yojana serves as a skill development initiative in alignment with international standards for training and certification of the Indian workforce, aspiring for overseas employment in select sectors and job roles. Various institutional frameworks have been established by the Government of India for facilitating safe and regular migration in alignment with multiple objectives of the GCM. India strives to enhance migration mobility at the bilateral level through various agreements. India has already signed a migration and mobility partnership agreement with France and UK, Labour multi-partnership agreement with Denmark, Portugal, Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. India has also signed MOU with Japan for specified skilled worker scheme. In addition to all these agreements, India is discussing with many countries, including Mauritius, Italy, Germany, Hungary, Slovenia, Andorra, Australia, and Japan to conclude more such agreements for enhancing the mobility of the people. Further, in March 2021, a joint collaborative project was launched by the Ministry of External Affairs, India Center for Migration and Global Migration Data Analysis Center with International Organization for Migration to strengthen data-informed and migrant-centered migration management frameworks for India. It aims to build a comprehensive approach to increase coordination between all bodies that harness immigration data to help aspiring Indian migrants make informed decisions to assess labor market opportunities in Europe. Dedicated efforts and substantive commitments are crucial for implementing the objectives of the GCM. Therefore, in addition to all the policy of Government of India, this panel discussion is an initiative to understand crucial perspectives from all stakeholders in conjunction with the whole of government and whole of society approach of GCM. I hope that valuable ideas and recommendations will emerge from the discussion. I look forward to hearing the insightful observation and again welcome all you to this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanjeev, for laying down the various policy initiatives and institutional arrangements entered into by Government of India. Now we'll move towards the panel discussion. I'll introduce the moderator for today's discussion, and thereafter he'll take forward the proceedings. So Shabri is fairly well known amongst all of us who work in this space of migration. He's the labor migration specialist for South Asia based in the ILO Decent Work Technical Support Team in New Delhi. He provides technical advisory services to 7 countries in the sub-region, which is Afghanistan, Bangladesh, India, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. Before joining ILO, he was working on global migration policy, including intergovernmental negotiation and also during the adoption of Global Compact for Migration with the newly established UN Network on Migration. He has been the focal point for Asia and Middle East in the labor migration branch. And prior to working with ILO, he was working with Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, SDC. Over to you, Shabri, for taking forward the proceedings.
Very much, Surabhi. Namaste to everybody present here. Congratulations to the Ministry of External Affairs and to the India Center for Migration, Surabhi, for just another timely event. Sanjeevji, it was an absolute pleasure to listen to you. In fact, when I was listening to you, I was reflecting on the statement that was made by the government of India in Marrakesh. Some of us were there. I know Amy certainly was there with me. We were together in Marrakesh during the adoption of the Global Compact for Migration in December 2018. Parvati certainly at the time as towards the end of the chairmanship of the United Nations University, where Parvati was previously in the context of the Global Migration Group, and a whole range of other actors. Of course, Professor Rajan and Professor Kadria and Professor Bhagat, they have all followed this very, very closely. So we are in the midst of 4 years later, well, almost 3.5 years later, preparing for the review of the Global Compact for Migration through the IMRF. And as Sanjeevji was talking, I was reflecting on the statement that was made by the government of India. I think, Sanjeevji, if I'm not mistaken, at the time it was Secretary West who was heading the delegation from the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, and who made the statement. And I would like to quote perhaps one of the starting the opening paragraphs that he had in his statement for the government of India. And it says this, quote, "The Global Compact for Migration is an aspirational document that seeks to facilitate legal pathways for migration. It does not deal with refugees. What it does is to promote migration by legal means for economic opportunity, decent work for decent pay, preservation of labor and human rights, and new pathways for regular migration." He goes on to then say, the statement then goes on to state that it recognizes the sovereign right of each state in determining its migration policy. Individual states can distinguish between regular and irregular migrants and determine the conditions of entry and stay of non-nationals in their jurisdiction, and need not follow a prescriptive approach. The statement goes on to say, the effort has been to strike a balance between the international cooperation framework for migration management and the salience of national realities, policies, and priorities in migration policies of individual states. There couldn't have been a better way of perhaps elaborating right at the outset India's perspective in the context of the Global Compact for Migration. And may I say, with almost a tremendous commitment for the implementation of the GCM, particularly over the last 2 years and the number of issues that have kept coming up. Since then, since 2018, we saw the first revised draft of the 1983 Immigration Act put forward. I think that itself was perhaps one of the first steps that India took in terms of its commitment to addressing the national migration policy, keeping in mind, in view of the existence now of the Global Compact for Migration, which India adopted. But we have a great panel that will go into details. I received officially a bio from Surabhi, from your colleague Gada, who was very kind to send me the bios of the different people here. But I'm very hesitant to read out a very formal introduction to everybody, simply because everybody here is known to me, and also because they come with a reputation that goes beyond their bios. They are all experts in their own ways and have done such tremendous work. I will start with Amy, and I will introduce the speakers as we go, so I won't go through everybody now. I'll start with Amy Mudin. Amy, how long have we known each other? Entire life, it almost feels
many years.
Many years. Amy, just perhaps one line. Amy is the deputy head of the UN Network on Migration Global Secretariat, based in Geneva, and has been with IOM prior to being inducted into the global network, UN Network Secretariat at the global level, and has spent many years following multilateral negotiations in the UN, posted out of the IOM office to the United Nations in New York. And really, Amy, such a pleasure to have you in India, in our country, to hear from you the details of how things have been going, keeping in mind the fact that we are just 3 months away, or less, 2 months away from the International Migration Review Forum. So it'll be, let's say, 7 to 8 minutes per speaker. And Amy, will start with you at the 7-minute mark. I'll perhaps just raise my hand or show you, shake my head, some indication of the fact that we're nearing the end of your time. Amy, over to you.
Great, thanks so much. It's always a pleasure to work with you and to see you again. And I want to thank the Ministry and the India Center for Migration for organizing this panel and for inviting me to join you here today. And indeed, this is an opportune moment. We're less than 2 months away from the first global review of the Global Compact, the International Migration Review Forum. And I thought I'd just take a moment with my remarks to maybe just start a little bit about the process, what's been happening now as we're going into the IMRF, and then maybe conclude with some substantive thoughts to kick off that part of the discussion. As we know, the IMRF will take place 17th through the 20th of May. It will be at UN headquarters in person in New York. It's going to be preceded by a one-day interactive informal hearing with multi-stakeholders. The entirety of it is being presided by the UN President of the General Assembly, who has on many occasions has expressed his commitment to the success of the very first global review. And it is an important opportunity for all of us to come together to reinforce the relevance and the timeliness of the compact itself, to not only assess its impact today, but for also, for us to have an honest conversation about what are the remaining gaps and challenges, and what are the possible future challenges that we have to face, and how best to equip societies for it, including through the use of the global compact. Now, just briefly on the forum itself, let me give a very, very quick overview. It will consist of 4 roundtables over the first couple of days that divide up all of the 23 objectives and look at implementation so far, while highlighting a lot of those gaps and challenges. The network, the UN Network on Migration, has worked on drafting background notes for each of these 4 roundtables through an extensive consultation with member states and stakeholders. These will be released next week by the President of the General Assembly. The forum will also include a policy debate, which is really going to focus more on emerging issues and future challenges, some of which were captured in the Secretary General's report, and I'll come back to that a bit later. And right now, as the network, we are undertaking some consultations to help draft a background note for that. That'll be made available at the end of April. And of course, like other GA events, there will be a plenary itself with opening and closing sessions that will give an opportunity for each member state of the General Assembly to make its national statement. Now, let me just say from the outset, because sometimes we get this question, because as you know, the Global Compact was adopted by many, but not all members of the General Assembly. But because it is a forum in the General Assembly, it's open to all of the member states, irrespective of their position then and now on the Global Compact. It's obviously also open to the UN system and stakeholders who are accredited to it. The forum will close with the adoption of a progress declaration, which is meant to be a brief, concise political document on the progress of GCM implementation and on recommendations going forward. Now, as you know, in the Global Compact, I mean, it is an awesome document, but what makes it particularly so is that it is firmly planted international migration governance on the UN's agenda for the foreseeable future by ensuring a follow-up and review mechanism. So after the IMRF in May, we will go back to having regional reviews in 2 years' time, and we will have the second iteration of the International Migration Review Forum in 4 years' time in 2026. Presently, the member states in the General Assembly in New York, they're negotiating the text of the progress declaration that was presented to them by the ambassadors of Bangladesh and Luxembourg, who are serving as co-facilitators of that progress. And the co-facilitators held earlier this month open town halls with member states, with stakeholders in the UN system, to receive ideas and input into this zero draft. They've also used the network Migration Network Hub discussion space, which allows everyone to come in to view the zero draft itself and to make comments and to ask questions for it. These negotiations will continue until about early May, and will hopefully conclude before the IMRF itself. Now, some of you may know, the UN Network on Migration was endorsed in the Global Compact itself. It was created by the Secretary General in response to the Global Compact to provide this type of timely, coordinated, and efficient support of the UN system. And we are 39 entities in the UN Network on Migration at the global level. And we're providing advice and support at the global, regional, and country level. For example, at the global level, currently we are providing a lot of support to the co-facilitators, both substantive and organizational, as they work on the progress declaration. But more specifically for the case of India, let me explain some of the network support. Last fall, we released a network roadmap on the IMRF, which provides a type of guidance and support and specifically encourages countries to undertake national voluntary reviews in terms of their implementation of the Global Compact, including through the support of country-based networks. Now, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that India might be considering establishing a country-based network, and in that regard, let me offer the Secretariat support or any guidance in that regard, and very happy to see that that might be forthcoming. But to undertake a national voluntary review would necessitate first a national level consultation, one that would bring together the various ministries of the government that work on the many different facets of migration. We know this to be extensive, along with the UN system and stakeholders. And this would be a very practical first step for India's preparation for the forum itself. A number of countries have been undertaking this currently, and a number of them had done this in preparation for the regional reviews last year, and we had over 90 reports submitted to us, and some countries are actually updating what they submitted to the regional reviews. And we're taking all these voluntary reports as they submit them to us and post them onto the Migration Network Hub for all to view. And the Migration Network Hub is a mechanism that was called for in the Global Compact for the network to establish capacity building mechanism. So this is a combination of the Connection Hub and the Global Knowledge Platform. And so it includes a repository of practices and an online discussion space that enables interaction, knowledge sharing, and exchange of information and learning on topics related to the implementation of the compact, and it's open to all member states and stakeholders. Yeah, for example, as I mentioned, the zero draft of the progress declaration is also there for all. As well, the network launched a pledging initiative late last year to encourage all of us to think beyond the IMRF and to make a measurable commitment to advance its implementation. And then just finally, let me quickly outline the Secretary General released his report last month on the implementation of the Global Compact, and he highlighted 4 priority areas for recommendation, and I wonder if this might feed into some of our discussion today. The first is on promoting inclusive societies and including migrants in COVID-19 response and recovery to shift towards the greater inclusion of migrants. We saw this observed in the pandemic's response, and to take those lessons learned from the pandemic and to use them beyond this, and to ensure that migrants have access to essential services that are separate from immigration enforcement activities. The second is on promoting safe and regular migration, which is a way to reduce the unsafe and irregular approaches to migration that we unfortunately continue to see. During the pandemic, we did notice a number of governments adopted flexible policies to prevent migrants from falling into irregular status, and it is important again to build on these lessons learned going forward. The third is on preventing the loss of life and other tragedies during migration, to develop safe, predictable disembarkation mechanisms for those rescued, and also to stop obstructing humanitarian efforts aimed at providing life-saving assistance. And finally, the fourth is on building capacity by encouraging governments to contribute to the Migration Multi-Partner Trust Funds, which funds country-based projects dedicated to implementation of the Global Compact and encourages migration to be incorporated into sustainable development and other frameworks, or for government to develop national implementation plans on the Global Compact. I'll leave it there. Thanks very much, Shabri.
Thank you so much, Amy. And I'm glad that that last 1 minute was a treasure trove of information, right? I think there were quite a few elements there, but I'm specifically thinking of those last 4 points that you made in terms of what the Secretary General asks and requests and urges member states to consider in their reporting itself, in their review. I'll tell you this, for instance, in the context of including migration in COVID-19 response, objective, the one on reintegration, objective 19, if I'm not mistaken, that particular objective, which is on return and reintegration, India was responsible for perhaps the biggest repatriation exercise coordinated by the Ministry of External Affairs, called the Vande Bharat mission, of migrants from around the world who had lost their jobs, and a whole host of reasons as to why migrants had to be brought back to India. The Vande Bharat mission, which has repatriated, if I'm not mistaken, or facilitated the movement of over 9 million Indians. I mean, this is, this has got to be perhaps one of those many highlights that I'm sure the government of India will take up, and as a result of which, taking into consideration the perspectives of the returnees in the context of reintegration, skills development, reskilling, upskilling, linking it to Objective 18 on skills in the context of the GCM, and of course a whole host of other activities. Safe and regular migration. I mean, we just heard Sanjeev ji talk about a whole range of bilateral labor migration agreements that the government of India has been engaged in over the last couple of years, and preventing loss of life. I mean, I can tell you this. The current crisis that we see, and how the government of India has been coordinating the return of Indians stuck in Ukraine is perhaps another example. And there are so many such examples, looking at a whole range of labor migration and other non-labor migration related issues. But thanks so much, Amy. We'll go on to the next speaker on my list. This is Professor Binod Khadria. Actually, no, Professor Binod Khadria, before I come to you, let me quickly go to Professor Rajan. He is the second on my list after Amy, so I'll go in that order. Professor Rajan, sir, first of all, namaskaram, vanakkam, because I never know whether I should greet you in Malayalam or Tamil, but either ways, I do both for you. And namaste from Delhi. In my case, I'm currently in Bangladesh, where I'm on mission. So it's a pleasure to have you on board. I know, without me saying, you're going to have a few highlight statements, right? So if there is news media in the room, or even if there isn't, Surabhi and I will take note, and we'll surely be flashing it around. Professor Rajan, over to you, sir.
Sure. Thank you, Surabhi, and thank you, Sanjeev Kumar and Sabari, for the introduction and invitation. In fact, when I heard from Sanjeev, of course, India has done many things, including the latest evacuation from Russia and Ukraine. But I just wanted to focus my attention today on only one objective, which I have a lot of interest. I don't want to talk on many things. So anyway, the last 2 years are bad years for migrants and migration. For globally, 2 bad years. Of course, for Kerala, all the 4 years are bad, because we had 2 years, we had flood years, 18 and 19, we had floods in Kerala. And then 2021, we had COVID-19. I think, so that for Kerala, all the 4 years are bad years. I was telling to the Kerala government, all were bad years, but globally 2 years are very bad due to lockdown and COVID-19. So I want to start with what Sabari read from the India's point of view during the initial 4 years back. I just want to read from the document itself, the Global Compact on Migration, a para which I like most. We recognize that there is a continuous need for international effort to strengthen our knowledge and analyzing migration as shared understanding will improve policies that unlock the potential of sustainable development. We must, I repeat this, we must collect and disseminate quality of data. Page 4, line 2 of the document. We must collect and disseminate quality of data. First, we must collect data, then only the quality of data comes in. Now, when you go over to the objectives, and it says very, very clearly, for providing safe, orderly, and regular migration, it says collect, utilize, accurate, and disaggregated data as a basis for evidence-based policies. In fact, there is a statement says you have to invest. You have to invest for getting the data. Now, when I look back last 4 years, how much, not just India, I think many countries in the world, how much you invested to collect data, because I'm not talking about even quality of data, collect just data. Disaggregation, forget about that. collect data on migrants and migration. Of course, we all proud that India is #1 in terms of remittances, $87 billion in 2021. But we have no idea how many are behind that migrants. Okay, the remittances is not sent by somebody, it is sent by someone. You know who is that, how many people are sending the remittances. I think that is still, I would put as a question mark. And that question mark, I want to pick up two crises we had in globally. One, of course, Russia-Ukraine war. Earlier was COVID-19. I want to get an example for us, you know, how we failed or we succeeded in getting some data on that. Let me get back to the recent crisis which is happening, still going on between Russia and Ukraine. When you look at the Ministry of External Affairs database which is provided for the public domain, it says non-resident Indians in Ukraine is 7,541. People of Indian origin is 422. The number put in the ME website is 7963. This is the number given in the official website of the Ministry of External Affairs prior to the crisis. Now let me read very interesting statement. I think it is very important how we are doing during the crisis. I am going to read a statement made by the Honorable External Affairs Minister, Dr. Saisankar, on March 15, not beyond, it's only 10 days back, in the Rajya Sabha on the situation on Ukraine. I quote, "We have ensured 22,500 Indian citizens returned safely through Operation Ganga. 22,500. It states again, in January 2021, Embassy of India in Ukraine asked the Indian to register. 20,000 plus Indians were registered. And the report goes further, saying that students from India, almost 35 states and UTs, we have only 36. He says 35 states and UTs had some students, and he says 1,000 students plus in at least in 7 states. Not the usual states, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat. Unusual state, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar and Rajasthan, Haryana. These many states have more than 10,000, more than 1,000 students. You are getting some disaggregate data on students among the 20,000, 22,500. And he concludes, which is very, very important for us. Despite our efforts, I quote again, despite our efforts, a large majority of students elected to continue to stay in Ukraine. That means some have not come. Assuming that all have come, we are talking about 22,500, but the website states 7,963. We have 200% underestimate of the population of Indians in Ukraine. 3 times more what we have. If you put that in the global number, I don't want to imagine now what we are talking today in the world about India's migration. I think we have to sit, think more on what data we are giving globally on the Indian migrants globally. Now, second point, on the same line on the crisis we had on COVID-19. Again, I go back, very important statement made by the, of course, we have the same External Affairs Minister, but exactly 1 year back, March 15, 2021, exactly 1 year back, I quote only one sentence, which is very, very important for us. He says that 4.5 million Indians were brought from 97 countries. If you take that 4.5 million, 1/4 of the Indians have returned. If you use the global official numbers of 18 million, 19 million, whatever million you are talking about, 1/4 have returned. I think this is the first time we have data on returned migrants. Thanks to crisis. Thanks to crisis. I don't think never we had data on returned migrants. And India produced first time data on 4.5 million returned back. When they returned, what happened to them? How many went back? We are still on the dark on that. We are still on the dark on that. We may have a lot of program to rehabilitate them, but many people return. When I spoke to them, they have returned to remigrate. Return to remigrate. Not all of them are still here. I know some people already left. Even people who came from Ukraine, they are going to other countries. So it is not like they are going to stuck in India. So I think this has to be looked at in the database. And finally, I'm located in Kerala. When the COVID was hit immediately, the government asked, because I was part of the what is called the Empowered Committee to advise the CM during COVID-19, day one. They asked how many people are likely to come back, where we should ready with the beds, because all have to be quarantined in last April and May. And I said, according to our survey, we have 2.1 million, at least 15% will come. So the Kerala government went and reported to the Supreme Court saying that we are ready with 300,000 beds. But finally, the finance minister said in the last budget, we received 14 lakhs, 1.4 million Keralites have returned back out of 2.1 million. Can you imagine 2/3 have returned? Do you know anything more than that? I think the question is that I think we have to invest during the crisis. I think we have to invest on database. And as I said earlier, we are getting some disaggregated data. Even the 4.5 million, the minister said during the COVID crisis, 2.5 lakhs are students. I think we are getting some disaggregation, not about gender anyway, because we are not getting anything more than that. Some numbers we are getting. I think time for us to invest, because I know now, right now, there is a big survey is going on to do on internal migrants. What is the government want to invest, at least in the future, to produce not even quality data? I don't ask, just data. Right now, we are 200% underestimate based on the Russia-Ukraine. I'm going to stop here, Sabari. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Point made loud and clear. I think the word invest clearly is one that you have focused on. And you're right. I think in many ways, objective one, to an extent, and I remember, Amy, during the negotiations itself in New York, objective one was one of those objectives that clearly required a lot of political will and support from all the governments right at the top, simply because it was that was the beginning of the migration process, even in terms of how the objectives were framed, that being the number one objective. Clearly, and I think, Amy, for you at the UN Network Secretariat, something that Professor Rajan mentioned here is very important for you to also know in terms of how we see sitting in South Asia and sitting in India in terms of states. India is as much a macrocosm of the states that constitute the country. And so, you know, the conversations around what are the state perspectives, the local, before we go down to local perspective, we need to understand the state perspectives. And that is also very important in this broader context. I mean, there are 19, if I'm not mistaken, 19 international airports in the country. So you can imagine migrant workers and migrants coming from all over when they say going back to India, they actually are thinking, the workers thinking, I'm going back home to my state and to that district that I come from. So just wanted to point that out. So thank you very much, Professor Rajan, for highlighting on a number of those issues. Very important. That brings me to Professor Binod Kadria. Professor Kadria is, how do you introduce someone who has been responsible for was it playing a role as an editor, a co-editor on the side for the World Migration Report for IOM, who has been involved in a number of consultations in the context of the Global Compact for Migration itself. Perhaps you know, one of the first people I read while I was studying on Indian diaspora and the role of Indian diaspora and the contribution of Indian migrants to the development of the country itself. Professor Kadria, there's no better way to introduce you except to say that you are an expert that all experts like myself want to be. So, sir, over to you.
For those very kind words, which have become now very familiar to me, to the extent of raising the bar so high as to becoming very tough for me. But I must start by thanking yourself and Surabhi and the ministry and the ICM and of course Sanjeev Kumar and my colleagues, of course, Dr. Rajan and Amy from the IOM. I think the introduction and your preface, Sabri, and the structure of the IMRF and the whole background and the foreground in terms of how the IMRF is going to, involve all the countries and all the stakeholders is something that has been provided. And of course, the data that, Irudaya has mentioned about the challenges have created a situation where I think I can perhaps reflect on the IMRF itself, rather than going into the nitty-gritty of the migration problems and the issues that are involved in those. What is it that are lying ahead for India in 1.5 months' time? That I think is one where we need to put our minds together. Of course, I think because the 23 objectives we are thinking about, and I tend to think that all the 23 objectives are not in the priority list of all the countries. The priorities are different, so we need to juggle them and list them in order of priority, and some of them maybe we just toss and some of them we carry with us, because if we spread the butter too thin, then we may not achieve anything, but we have to focus. That I think is extremely important. And from that point of view, if I look at 23 objectives, I don't have them at my fingertips, but I can see some of them where, India has the strong point, the advantages to give a leadership to the world. And that I think is extremely important. India need not be a backbencher at the IMRF and raising hand in support of things, but India should take the leadership in areas where India has the strength, and the best practices allow us to do that. And that's where I think, Sanjeev Kumar mentioned about the demographic dividend. It's not only the demographic dividend, but it is the diaspora dividend that we need to understand properly. Objective 19. Now, what is the uniqueness of Objective 19? And I have written about it very recently. The Objective 19 stands out from the rest of them in terms of putting the onus of contribution on the migrants and the diaspora, and not on the governments. All the other objectives, 22 objectives, the onus lies on the states, member states. That I think is a unique characteristic of Objective 19, and that is where India's strength lies. The 32 million that has been mentioned, or the 18 million that the UN document mentions in terms of definitions. We can also clear that confusion, what means 32 and what means 18 million. But, how to mobilize, how to catalyze this diaspora and guide it in terms of the contributions of migrants that has been so far marginalized. We are talking about states, we are talking about origin countries, we are talking about destination countries, transit countries, but where are the migrants? Where are the diaspora? I have said it in ICM earlier webinars that many a times we are discussing migrants, but there's not a single representative of the migrant in this forum. And I'm glad to say that in subsequent webinars, ICM made an extra effort to invite migrants and to have their voices here. And that applies to IMRF also. I think I'm glad Amy is here. We have to ask this question, whether Indian migrants or returnees have a space in IMRF, either through stakeholder on the first day prior to the IMRF or during the IMRF or their representatives. That I think is going to be important, and India need to press that, even if India stands alone in doing that. That I think is extremely important, and I have shared my views on multilateralism. I have seen, you have mentioned my taking part in the in the GCM process in the thematic debate. I was the thematic expert in the second on drivers of migration. And I have seen how it works. You have many times shared how the time constraint, of each member state speaking. You shared your experience of the African representative and the Secretary General throwing the clock outside the window. That is a real challenge. How much time each member state gets to represent in that. And that's where I think we need to understand that this kind of global multilateralism actually does not lead unless what Amy shared with us, the national review process, the voluntary process, national is actually supporting that. Unless we do that, homework in India in the next 1.5 months in national voluntary review and prepare ourselves, we will be going there half prepared. And that is where I have seen in all multilateral, whether it is WTO or whether it is other kinds of negotiations, all the developed countries are well prepared. They have their green rooms where they go back in between and talk, but the global south remains divided. That's where India has the massive scope to give leadership to the global south. And this is an opportunity the IMRF provides. This is where the Indian strength and Indian weaknesses are going to be very important. We have to also focus on our weaknesses. What lessons did we learn during the COVID? Yes, of course, Vande Bharat is one we need to flag, how to bring back the returnees and how to provide them safety and so on. This is where we have to make that distinction right in the beginning when the GCM was being debated, that the drivers need to be driven by choice, not by necessity. That's where I think the diaspora that Sanjeev Kumar mentioned right in the beginning, that Indian highly skilled professionals which are in the rest of the world, they are India's strength. But at the same time, they are driven by choice. But who are the people who are driven by necessity? The Gulf migrants, the migrants that my friend Irudaya mentioned from Kerala. Are they going by choice? Or maybe over time it has become choice, but it is still the main driver there is necessity. That's where India needs to share its experience, the good practices. And I also talk about bad practices. The bad practice guidelines is a more of a advisor for us in terms of what are our experiences, lessons from our failures. That's why bad practices need to be phased out over time, and we don't have to stick around with them. Rather, we probably need to be very clear and practical about saying that good practices do not fall from heaven. Good practices are very rare, but bad practices abound. And that's where we need to replace the bad practices from the good practices. I think it's an extremely important opportunity. We should not take it lightly. We have to prepare it. And I'm glad I'm speaking in ICM, in the ministry's domain, and where international organizations like yourself, ILO and IOM are being represented. And my friend Parvati is also there. And of course, the demographer is also there from IIPS. My friend is here. I think this is an extremely important opportunity. I will not steal more of the time. I would rather wait for the discussion when everybody has spoken and that take it from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Binod sir. In fact, I must tell you this, and Amy and I, and of course Parvati as well in the UN, we usually called it best practices. Then we kind of toned it down to good practices. I don't know what we call it now, but I think they are examples that we say. But I like your idea of bad practice guidelines, because that helps us or that tells us what not to do, right? So perhaps something to keep in mind. But look, your point on objective 19, and I stand corrected, objective 21 is on reintegration, but objective 19, which specifically talks about creating conditions for migrants and diasporas to fully contribute, is very, very important. That also leads me to ask Amy, I hear about a lot of conversations coming out of New York about multi-stakeholder ownership, the access for civil society, trade unions, employers organizations, private sector to get access to the IMRF itself. I hear a lot of that. So perhaps you could even address that. I think, going straight in connection to what Professor Kadria has mentioned here. That brings me to my next speaker, Professor Ram Bhagat. Professor Bhagat, I can only describe him in 3 words: humble, humble, and humble. So that's one word 3 times, just a very humble person, somebody I have gotten to really appreciate, learn from. He is the head of the secretariat of the the labor migration, the Salam knowledge hub. In the context, the South Asia Labor Migration Knowledge Hub, Salam it's called, in South Asia, from the International Institute for Population Sciences, has been such a tremendous source of information for all of us on various issues. Amy, if there is one way to see how people really coordinate with different agencies, giving everybody an equal ownership status, we need to learn from Professor Bhagat. So Professor Bhagat, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sabri, for nice words. And I must thank India Center for Migration, Mr. Sanjeev Kumar and Dr. Surabhi Singh for inviting me. It's a great opportunity to be part of this panel and listening previous speakers. I will begin by saying that GCM is a very comprehensive and very sound document. It has a philosophy and a theory, I think, which is rooted in human rights and sustainable development. And in that respect, I think it is a remarkable document with 23 objectives and various themes that it covers, like human rights, governance, irregular, regular migration, trafficking, and also contribution of migrants. And when we see the linkage between GCM and sustainable development, I like to mention here that this connection between the two reflects in 3 important aspects of the characteristics of sustainable development. One is that leave no one behind. And in that respect, whole of society approach or whole of government approach comes into being. The second most important thing is that development is not economic. Development is social and development is environmental. And development, thirdly, development rests on 5 pillars: planet, people, prosperity, peace, and partnership. I think this document is well conceptualized philosophically and theoretically, and GCM derives its strength from that, and we are actually moving or should move to achieve these objectives globally. Coming to the issue of migration, and particularly the international migration, and when we talk about policies and programs, there are some methodological issues. And one is that whether we are looking at from destination countries' point of view or origin countries' point of view. Each country is sovereign, and that GCM recognizes that we must recognize the sovereignty of the country, and each country can formulate policy and program in its respect, in their interest. So I think from us who are sending the labor migrant, a perspective from country of origin becomes very, very important. So that is one thing that we must look everything or mostly from the point of view of the country of origin and what possibly we have been doing and what we can do. Second most important thing is that we have to make a distinction between migration and migrant. And in this respect, emigration versus emigrant. Sometimes we are giving so much importance to emigration, that is the process, and we are not able to give much importance to the emigrant. And so in that respect, India has done quite well. And we have these programs like Pravasi Kushal Vikas Yojana, Pravasi Bharatiya Bima Yojana, Indian Community Welfare Fund, and so many others. I think these are related to emigrants, the migrants, and that is very good thing. when we look at the e-migrate portal, and where we have this mandatory registration, and it regulates and provides protection to the immigrants for safe migration. I think it is too much loaded with immigration clearance, and we have to also strengthen how it can be a source of data, information, and protection for the immigrants. So there is a need to make a balance and to develop it further. This is a great thing. This is a great innovation that has been done, but every innovation needs to be, keeps on evolving and needs to be strengthened. Another important thing from countries of origin point of view, that yes, we are now almost agreement as we accept the GCM agenda and objectives, that yes, immigration is a choice, and it is a choice of employment overseas, and how far this choice can be exercised by the people of India, and the skill development, etc. All these are, I think, this a good thing that is happening. But we have to also ensure that it is not only the right to get job, but right to leave the job. And that is important, how far our people, those who are in the Gulf country, those who are choosing the job, getting the job, to what extent they are empowered, or we can, country can empower them to leave the job. And therefore, that is how it is related with the kafala system. And India should do something, make certain strategy that our people, migrant people or labor migrant, those who are going there, they can leave the job. And in that respect, I think return migration assumes very, very important. Return migration should not be looked as a matter of crisis. There was a COVID crisis, and therefore we have Vande Bharat, and then a lot of people return, and we have created a Swadesh portal and registered, and that's fine. But it should be regular exercise. Return should be a right. Choosing the employment is a right, as well as the leaving the employment should be right. And in that respect, I think somebody has mentioned the objective. Objective 21, I see that relates to cooperate in facilitating safe and dignified return and readmission, as well as sustainable reintegration. Our return should be dignified. That's, I think, as an origin country, we should ensure this. So this is how India can do, and how we can pressurize our policy maker to work towards it. In that respect, one of the critical things is that our labor migrants are also the citizens of this country. That we must recognize. And their political rights must be ensured. Government is doing, Election Commission of India has been doing. There is a National Voters Service portal where an immigrant can register and get voter card and exercise also voting through electronic voting. Now these some of the things are coming up. But then this portal or getting voting right is very cumbersome. So this process should be eased. And in that respect, I like to submit that now it is high time that we must recognize our immigrants, or NRI, what we call non-resident citizens of India. Why I am bringing this word citizenship is very important, because it gives them identity. They are not simply labor migrant. They are the citizens of India. They are non-citizens of India. And that's how we have to make a difference between diaspora and migrant. And we have to also organize like Pravasi Shramik Divas, not only Pravasi Bharati Divas, but Pravasi Shramik Divas and Pravasi Shramik Samman. I think these are high time that we recognize our migrant community and giving them identity, dignity, and respect, So these are, I think, some of my points. And in a minute, I like to say about Salam, what Sabri has said. We have established South Asia Center for Labor Mobility and Migrants with the help of with support from ILO, IOM, UN Women, and funded by Swiss Agency for Development and Corporation. And we are 5 South Asian institutions which are working together, and the IIPS is serving as a nodal agency. And in the last few months, we have shared a lot of ideas. We have organized lectures. I think 4 lectures we have organized, and our 5th lecture is going to be on 5th April. So we will invite all of you, please come and join to the lecture and contribute and support us. And Professor Khadaria, Professor Irdharaj, and all are our advisory committee members. So I think this is our initiative in South Asia, and we like to strengthen our understanding by sharing ideas, capacity building, further research for evidence-based policy and program in the country. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bhagat. You know, when you spoke about planet, people, peace, prosperity, and partnerships, again, you know, you bring up the SDGs, the 2030 agenda, and almost the entirety of the conversations in the GCM was rooted in the 2030 agenda. So, you know, if you look at the guiding principles of the Global Compact for Migration, the very first guiding principle is about how the GCM should be implemented in a people-centered manner, focusing on the migrant workers. So there couldn't have been a better connection that you bring. I like what you say about right to get the job and right to be able to leave a job. The Gulf example, which you, Professor Raj and Professor Kadria, all have brought along. 2 weeks back, I was in Qatar for a mission with trade union delegates from South Asia to assess the situation of migrant rights there. And perhaps the first thing that we hear from every migrant worker now, Indian or otherwise from South Asia in Qatar, is they say, we now have the ability to leave our job and move to another employer if we want to. There, first perhaps indicator of the eradication of not just the kafala system, but forced labor as a whole in the context of those conversations. Thank you very much, Professor Bhagat. That brings me to my last speaker, somebody who I know would be great at summing it up. I only know Parvati Nair in one way, and that is in 2017 when I joined the ILO headquarters in Geneva. I had one meeting with Parvati. Of course, our last names do match. We have a certain Kerala connection, but Parvati was also the representative of the chair of the Global Migration Group, the rector of the United Nations University, speaking and trying to hold us UN agencies together before the establishment of the UN Network on Migration. And gosh, you should have seen the calm and composed manner with which she did it. So Parvati, I want to be, once again, I would emulate to be you. Parvati, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Shabari. It's very, very good to be here. It's greetings from London. Namaste to everyone. It's wonderful to be here, to have this. I'm deeply honored to have this invitation from the India Center for Migration, but also to once again reconnect with very dear colleagues, teachers, friends. So, I have wonderful memories of our time together. Shabari in Geneva meetings where we were thrashing out, I think, details of the very first draft of the GCM, in its initial form. And of course, many, many times that I listened to Professor Binod speaking, learned so much from him, from Professor Irdharaj and so many others here. And also, people I've been working with more recently, like Abhishek, I can see his name here. So it's wonderful to be here, and Amy as well, to see you again. So thank you for this. I take as my starting point a sort of broad, I think it's a broad reflection, and it's really as an Indian abroad. I'm here in London, as you know, where I've lived for many, many years. It's Objective 16, empower migrants and societies to realize full inclusion and social cohesion. And I've been listening, to what all the speakers have been saying today, So, you know, I'm trying to put it all together, as you said, Shabari, but I will be speaking, you know, on the move, so to say. But really, I think, you know, I speak as someone who is a second generation Indian. And I want to say that, you know, that influences my thinking as much as sort of any work that I have done on migration. And indeed the other way around, that probably I work on migration because I'm a second generation Indian and because that Indian heritage has been absolutely fundamental in shaping the way I position myself in the whole world. So, you know, as part of that vast diaspora that we spoke about, I think India has a lot to be very proud of in terms of its own sheer history, as, you know, being part of that history of humanity on the move. Because while the study of migration from India or, you know, Indian diasporas is relatively new, you know, it's a relatively new field. Actually, the reality and practice of migration from India is extremely old, of course, goes back to many centuries, and it's historical. So I think that's the first thing, that Indians have always, you know, for a long time, Indians have been global citizens as much as they have been Indian citizens. The other thing is, I think, is that India, since independence, has been exemplary in its, and the Ministry of External Affairs, of course, stands out there, has been exemplary in its efforts, you know, for bilateral and, you know, conversations and engagements at the multilateral level. So India has always been an eloquent partner. It's a regional, you know, it's a regional giant, but it's also a country that has always looked outward and engaged with other countries in very proactive ways, whilst also shaping its own sovereignty, its own sense of identity as a country and a nation. So I think these exemplary initiatives that we have at the moment around skills development, insurance for workers who are on more precarious, you know, situations, the welfare of immigrants, rescue operations, the creation of corridors for migration, for legal migration, are all excellent examples, if you like, in practice and in policy. And one that predates these efforts, predates the GCM, is of course the creation of the PIO and OCI cards, which immediately gave Indians multiple options. So, you know, you could be Indian and something else at the same time. And so it is that idea of plurality and adaptability and flexibility, and also welcome back to the land of heritage, to the homeland, to those who are living abroad. That is absolutely, I think, you know, invaluable as somebody living abroad. So I think India has very clearly established itself as a partner, as mobile, supportive, if you like, of multiple affiliations and of multiple cultures, nationalities, and networks. And obviously, there are many ways in which India is officially, you know, and in the policies field, you know, participating. We mentioned all the sort of, they've already been mentioned, the dialogues, the work with IOM, etc. And I think the eMigrate portal, while it may not be up to date and while it might constantly need to be, to be reworked and revised, is nevertheless a very interesting website, a very useful tool to have. And there are not many of that sort. I think that in terms of empowering migrants and societies to realize full inclusion, if we look at these last 4 years, we've already established that in some places like Kerala, you know, they've been tremendously challenging years. And of course, worldwide, they've been hugely challenging. And I think that no one could have foreseen, when we were in Marrakesh, you know, the signing of the GCM, no one could have foreseen that actually all of us were going to be online very soon, and that, you know, this COVID-19 pandemic was going to deeply affect the entire world. So the obvious impact is, of course, much more on the more precarious and lower income immigrants. So I think in talking about India and its relationship with its diaspora, one of the most important distinctions that needs to be made, if you like, are those of, to put it bluntly, social class, if you like, of economic access to economic freedoms and opportunities, of skill level. There is a vast difference between the Indian who is hired as a laborer in the Gulf and the Indian who is an academic in the US, or a very high-skilled professional, a CEO somewhere. And I think that India, we need to flag up the different sort of factors that are important in terms of empowerment of migrants. One of them, of course, is, educational skill levels, income levels, documentation levels, the ability. There is a difference between the Indian who remains with only an Indian passport working somewhere else and those who have access to multiple documentations. So I think one of the sort of examples that India might want to think about is, for example, that of the guest worker in Germany, going back many years ago, whereby, you had Turkish workers, for example, living and working in Germany for 30 years, bringing up their children in Germany, only to be told at the end of their employment that you are now retired and you may go home. Go home. And home, of course, had over 30 years become Germany, to some extent at least. And then there is the flip side of that, which is what happened to many such workers in the UK back in the day when the UK joined the European Union. There had been many workers here from the southern Mediterranean countries, historically the poorer countries of Southern Europe. And of course, those were people, again, with this either-or situation until the UK had joined the EU, what was then the European Community. And at that point, they gained the great freedom to once again become mobile citizens of the world, whereby they could visit children who were here and visit parents who were there and spend their retirements with a great deal of flexibility. And some of that has been deeply cut into, of course, through Brexit in this country. So I think India needs to also look very carefully at pre-existing patterns and problems that have, appeared in other contexts in order to work proactively to prevent them. I think also if we look, we need to look at the question of data. I think that was a very important and interesting point that was raised earlier. The question of data, particularly for the undocumented, remains incredibly problematic because the definition of being undocumented is that there is no data for this person or these people. So I think that the question of how can we address and support those who have been caught up in networks of smuggling and trafficking. And I'm thinking, for example, of the borders of Poland, where now Ukrainian refugees, are being welcomed, but precisely also the place where in the bitter cold of winter, there were so many migrants and refugees from Asia who were held up there or beaten back and were living in extremely difficult and dangerous conditions, often with very severe physical harm that had come to them through, being in that undocumented situation on those border zones of the EU. So I think that these conversations around the humane and dignified treatment of the undocumented, not because we want to support them, but because they do exist, is extremely important. I think also India needs also to take into account in its reporting maybe some attention to the fact that it is a regional giant. It is, and Shabari, I think you are in the thick of this and you know much more than I do about this. But it is also a country of immigration and also transit migration. And in that sense, what are we doing about that in India and how is that going? I think a little bit of attention to that would be interesting to understand also the regional conversations and networks that are taking place. I also think—
Could you conclude?
Yes, I will in 2 minutes, in 1 minute.
2 minutes, sorry, 30 seconds.
30 seconds, Shabri. I think the other thing is also looking at the partners, who are the government's partners, civil society, for example. And of course, as you said, migrant-led organizations and migrants representing themselves. So I will conclude here just to say that also there is the question of, this phenomenal amount of remittances that India receives. And how can some of that be channeled to invest in youth? So because I think ultimately nobody really wants to leave home unless they really feel that there are very strong reasons to do so. So I will stop here with those questions and thank you.
Thanks so much, Parvati. Really appreciate it. In fact, you know, the point that you were making about the right at the beginning about the Indian diaspora itself, the Honorable Prime Minister of India said a couple of years back, if I'm not mistaken, on one of his trips, he said that India's diaspora are the bridge, or is the bridge between India and the country that India wants to build a good relationship with. And I think clearly you have nicely taken on some of those elements. And you're right about social class and access to economic freedom and all of that, which contributes to migration in big ways. You know, we heard from Sanjeev ji right at the beginning of the number 32 million Indian migrant workers and diaspora, 18 of which are migrant workers and the others don't hold Indian passports like you, but like you, Parvati, are OCI, overseas citizens of India. And these 18 million are almost entirely migrant worker class. What's a migrant worker is exactly what you said, you know, right from the doctor and the academic like yourself in the UK to the engineer to the construction workers and the domestic workers in the Middle East. So it's a whole range of people. And I couldn't agree more with you. And that's so much of a conversation in the context of India as well. That makes me want to open the floor. Now, I always realize this because Surabhi, and I take full responsibility for this. I know that I'm, you know, somehow I'm just so enamored by all the people talking that I forget and I lose track of time. We have 10 minutes, but I'm sure if everybody is ready to indulge, we'll take 15 instead of 10. And I'd like to open the floor. And maybe for some quick interventions for everybody, and then come back to a quick wrap up from the panelists themselves. So I'll do it the traditional way. Any quick interventions? Please raise your hands or just feel free to unmute, turn on your videos, quick introduction of who you are, and say your piece. Naresh, you have your hand raised. Go ahead, Naresh. Thank you for breaking the ice, Naresh. Please go ahead. Naresh, we can't hear you. Sorry, we can't see you certainly. Yep. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Sabri. And I'm very happy to actually to participate in this important forum, IMRF actually, which is going to hold this, going to actually conduct IMRF in UN headquarters in USA. And I'm also happy actually recently our organization also become one of the stakeholders or as a representative maybe participate in this important forum. As we are working in the field of diaspora, Center for Diaspora Studies in Central University of Gujarat, and I'm also one of the faculties in the department. And I'm very much happy to listen our teacher, our colleagues who actually very much supported to develop the center, like Professor Irudya Raj and Professor Bhagat and Professor Chadaria sir, and even Professor Sabri Nair also associated to actually given inputs to develop the centers. And many other also actually ME also supported so much, organized some of the important conference in the migration and development point of view. So as actually in academic point of view, we are actually facing so many problems as per already also raised by the Professor Irudya Rajan and even Professor Bhagat and Professor Chadaria within the overall framework of the GCM Objective 1 and 2. So as my expertise in the field of migration and diaspora, particularly in the related to data, so we are actually facing so many actually problem in case of actually capturing the data in case of.
Naresh, sorry, could you perhaps get to your question quickly, if there is a question, or conclude quickly, please?
So there is no doubt actually within the framework of GCM 1 and GCM 3 related to data and this related to the actually utilizing the data and providing accurate information. So there is no doubt actually we have a limited information in case of actually capturing the migration or diaspora actually related information. So somehow actually doing lots for and recently so many actually ports have been developed. And like e-migrant and recently this radio actually also has been developed by the MEA with the support of this actually UNHCR, Indian UNHCR.
Naresh,
so
Naresh,
there is no we need to do
it's
lots.
not very clear, but we get the gist of what you're saying. Basically, the importance of data. Radio is something that I've heard of. Certainly, I think former Secretary for MEA, CPV, OIA was also responsible somewhere there to bring it to life. No, look, we hear your point loud and clear. If I could quickly go to some of the other participants, we've just had Sanjay Avasthi from the IOM head of office. The IOM head of office here raise his hand. Sugandha Nagpal from the Jindal Global School is here. So if we could quickly hear them, but point well taken, Naresh, in the context of data. Thanks so much. Sanjay, over to you.
Thank you, Shabri. I'm Sanjay. I represent IOM in India. And thanks to you as well as the hosts, the co-hosts from ICM and the Ministry of External Affairs. I don't have any additional information to share because almost all of the areas have been very comprehensively covered by the speakers. I just wish to share three important pieces of information. Number one, we not only us, but the Government of India, Ministry of External Affairs also recognizes the need to have a coordinated effort on migration-related data. And that's why we are undertaking a project jointly, IOM and Ministry of External Affairs, on migration data management framework. So hopefully the ministry would be in a position to share some of the steps that might be possible to be taken in future. So that's number one. Number two is that, and that's a very positive news, that the Government of India is in the process of deciding on the highest level possible representation in the IMRF. So that's a good news, and we hope to get that confirmed soon. And the third piece of information, which is specifically related to Objective 19, diaspora engagement, IOM and the Government of Ireland, they are jointly hosting the International Diaspora Summit in the first week of April in Dublin. And that specifically is going to look at Objective 19. It's going to have the participation of member states as well as other stakeholders. And it's going to feed very significantly into the IMRF discussion subsequently. So that's all I wanted to state. Nothing more from me. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Sanjay. Yes, this international diaspora meet organized by the government of Ireland with IOM certainly seems interesting. Thanks a lot. This also, this links into a whole range of other objectives, 5, 6 on fair recruitment, 18 on skills development. I mean, we can go on with regards to how India's focus goes across the board, cuts across the board on the different objectives. Sugandha, over to you. And then I come to Chetan. Sugandha, please.
Thank you so much for the wonderful sort of speakers and their thoughts. It was really nice to hear that. Just quickly, I have 2 points to make. So firstly, I think this discussion on data is very important, but I was also wondering if we can deconstruct it a little bit. So I think one part of it is the quantitative data on number of people migrating, people who are remigrating, staying. But the other part is also qualitatively what is happening around people's migration trajectories, like how are they making these decisions, right? So the decision-making aspect of it. And also coming to the diaspora question, just to give an example of what I meant, if maybe we can think about this data mapping as an exercise to also get at what the gaps are, right? So engaging the diaspora is, something that there's been a lot of work. So I work in the context of Punjab. And there are a number of sort of state channels to engage the diaspora and diaspora philanthropic activities, but it's never really worked really well because a lot of times the diaspora is more interested in going through community channels, through religious organizations. So given that kind of research input we have, maybe we can think about policy as also shaped by how can we engage, how can state actors engage then with these sort of community channels to facilitate diaspora philanthropy. So that was just, and I'd love to hear people's thoughts on that, and whether this kind of exercise around mapping of data and what sort of we have and what we don't have already exists. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sugandha. And that brings me to Chetan. Chetan, please. Chetan,
Hi.
if you could also quickly introduce yourself.
Hi, good afternoon and greetings to all. My name is Chetan Choithani and I'm with the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore. So thank you for the opportunity to be a participant in this very important discussion. I learned a lot, from everyone. So I think a lot has been said about data, and I also want to echo some of the concerns, that a lot of people have already raised. Dr. Rajan, to start with. And I want to focus on, more on low-skilled international labor migration. I think the reason is, we've traditionally focused more on migrants. Mr. Sanjeev Kumar mentioned that in his opening remarks. Dr. Vinod also noted about this diaspora dividend, and we know that the skilled Indian diaspora has a tremendous influence on our policies back home also. But as I was looking at some of the data, so of the 13 million NRIs that we have, 9 million, about 66% work in just 6 countries in the Gulf, and majority, in fact, of these migrants are low.
Go ahead, Chetan.
Yeah. So Kerala used to be what I want to really point out, since we're talking about data, and IM is also planning initiative in that direction.
I'm not sure if it's just me, but Chetan, I don't think we can hear you. Okay. Chetan, I don't think Chetan can hear us as well, because. And I'm very hesitant to move on now. Chetan, unfortunately, we can't hear you.
Perhaps we can drop a message in the chat box.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Surabhi. Thanks so much. This is okay. I'm going to do this the right way. So I'm going to let Chetan finish whatever it is that he's saying, because otherwise I just wouldn't feel right about it. So I'm going to be taking my discretionary powers here, Surabhi, as moderator, just to be respectful of everybody. Thanks, Chetan. I really hope that's it. Okay. Gosh, no. Sorry. Okay, we'll move on to the next. If there is anybody. Naresh, I still see a hand. I'm thinking that's an old hand of yours. It's what we call in the webinar world, the virtual world. Yeah, the hand's gone down, the legacy hand. Okay, and it's come back up. But I don't think it's anything in specific. So we will. Good. We will conclude. We'll wrap up. If there is anybody who would like to say, rather than wanting to go to every speaker and say something to wrap up, I would really let the speakers, Amy, any famous last words, not necessarily along those lines, but also, the multi-stakeholder context, maybe a quick point on that.
Sure. Very happy to very quickly respond to that, and also noticing the diversity of voices in the example of India that I imagine carries through in a number of other countries. And you might remember in the run up to Marrakesh how many mayors were part of the negotiation and consultations, and how much their voices have grown in the process since. So as the network, we have been encouraging member states to include in their national delegations either local authorities and or stakeholders who are accredited to the process to ensure that they are respecting the whole of government and whole of society approach in their participation in the IMRF. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. And I really hope that happens, because that is going to be very important. And I can tell you, not just from India, I'm just coming out of a whole range of meetings here in Bangladesh, certainly the case across South Asia and other parts of the world, I presume. Professor Kadria.
And for excellent moderation. Well, concluding remark, I would only say we should not miss the bus because this will come only after 4 years, like the Olympics. And we need to gear up for that. That's where India, when I say take the leadership, in regional terms, India also needs to, tie up with the South Asian countries that Bhagat had mentioned, listed them. We need to take that, the game together. That, I think, is definitely which has come out from this discussion. And that's where we need to identify our strength as well as our weaknesses. And that's where I think the opportunity lies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Professor Rajan.
2 words probably, because I remember when the Kerala CM was asking us what I should do in the election manifesto in Kerala on migration. I said to him before the election, 14 lakhs people have come back, they are going to vote for you, you are going to win the election. And he said it is true, yes, they have never voted. First time they are coming in a large number and they voted for him. But I don't think they are doing anything for them after that they won the elections. So I asked them to do a survey. Now I am talking to the global Malayali diaspora for funding the Kerala migrant survey, because the Kerala government is failing because they thought now they got the vote, they came back to power. So I think this is something to be learned. The returned migrants also being cheated. We see that right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rajan. Professor Bhagat.
Yes, thank you. I think data is very important, and we should have some convergence among the stakeholder ministries, Ministry of External Affairs, Ministry of Home Affairs, and Ministry of Skill Development. And we have already 2 portals, eMigrate and Swadesh. Somehow this to be strengthened, data to be made accessible for use. And I think this is a great opportunity to fill up the data gaps. Secondly, we must be clear what data we are talking about. What is definition? Whether are you talking about immigrants, diaspora, or NRI? Each one has different meanings. Sometimes we are mixing up and messing up when data definitions are concerned. So definitions are very important, and yes, something can be done from the civil society or from academic institution also. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bhagat and Parvati.
Yes, yeah, thank you for a great discussion. I think I would just like to, as a parting message, highlight what I think Surabhi mentioned, which is the importance of the qualitative as well as the quantitative. I think just data is deeply problematic, but how we actually understand the complexities of what is happening requires, I think, a multi-pronged approach as well. And so that, combination of the qualitative with the quantitative might be something that we want to think about as well in terms of making sure that, we're catching the nuances and the specificities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I am.
Looks like Sabari is gone. Yeah.
Sabri?
Blackout in his room.
Yeah.
It seems there was a power cut.
My apologies also. I lost my Bluetooth, so I don't know what I was. So apologies.
Okay.
Perhaps we'll
Oh, now we can't
take
hear
him
you.
along. No, I was just saying that perhaps we'll take him on board when he's able to join again. Meanwhile, there were some points raised during the discussion, and while we agree that some of the points are really crucial, the point being made about data, we do realize that data is not as good as it ought to be, but steps we are taking in that direction, gradual though it may be. And eMigrate is being revamped. So that is something which is happening at the moment. It is also being integrated with destination country platforms. So with UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, in the coming days, you will see eMigrate being integrated with all these platforms. Also, the point being made about diaspora. So we certainly are making efforts in that direction as well. Though the point about diaspora and how we need to connect is again well taken. There was a recent conclave organized by OIA2 division with European diaspora. We are also looking at connecting with diaspora at destination and involve them in upskilling programs. A pilot project in this direction was done at Dubai with the help of CGI Dubai. So that is something which is also, all these are experimentations. We will see how the outcomes are to really take on board further steps that one could take in this direction. Also, a point which Professor Khadria made, that all countries have to identify that their priorities, because GCM lists out a range of objectives. So we do fully agree with that, because it's impossible for one country to achieve all the objectives which are mentioned out in the GCM document, though they do serve as a guiding framework. So steps are being taken in that directions. But the point of having this conversation was to really hear from all of you what more we can do. And in that, I think we were able to have a great discussion. So I thank all the speakers who were here today, including Shabri, who's not able to log in, Professor Khadaria, Professor Rajan, Professor Bhagat, Professor Nair. Amy had to leave for some meeting. But we have taken your suggestions, and maybe in the coming days, as we prepare for the discussion, we will, if time permits and we are able to do something on these lines, perhaps we'll come on board again and reach out to all of you to see how we can further sharpen our interventions as we do go ahead for IMRF. So thank you everyone who has joined us today. And I also thank my team who's for reaching out to all of you and bringing together today's deliberations. Before we close, I would just urge all of you to kindly turn on your cameras so that we can take a virtual snap with all of you. So we'll just wait for about 30 seconds for everyone to turn on their cameras.